Hey everyone, Rob from Southgate Media Group here. Before we get started with this podcast, we have a quick message. If this is your first time checking out the show, we love that you found us and we really hope you enjoy it. What we have to say is for the subscribers. If you enjoy our shows, would you please donate to help keep these going? We don't want to have to put traditional ads on these shows, but this does cost money. So we really do rely heavily on donations. To make a donation to the show, please go to our website, www.southgatemediagroup.com. Go to the page for the show, and in the upper right-hand corner is a donate button. It takes you right to PayPal, and you can donate whatever amount you want. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. And now, on with the show.
Hello and welcome to the ShowRatings.tv Pilot Roundtable, a Southgate Media Group podcast. I'm Kyle Tremblay, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Olivia Richards. Olivia, how are you today?
I am great. How are you?
I am doing very well. Olivia, this is the first week of the fall where we had no pilots.
I know, I'm surprised. Normally, we get the email list and we have, a lineup of, 5 that we have.
I know. Normally I'm collecting them to set the schedule for what we're going to talk about. And there's a whole bunch. And this week, not a one.
There's nothing. Yay.
Yeah, but you're still listening to us talk because we are debuting a new feature called the Pilot Check-In, where you and I just watch the most recent episode of newly premiered shows and talk about that, and see if the show's gotten any better or worse or notably different from when we talked about the pilot. So you ready to go?
Oh, I'm absolutely ready to go.
All right. Our first of 3 shows today is The Mysteries of Laura, and we watched episode 8 titled The Mystery of the Mobile Murder. Olivia, what did you think?
Well, when I was comparing it to the pilot, I'm kind of definitely fascinated by the relationship between Laura and Jake, who is her police ex-husband.
Yes.
So that's sort of like the sexual tension of the show.
Of course.
Do we want her to kiss him? Do we want her to punch him? What do we want? But yeah, no, I'm definitely seeing the show kind of make a progression from the pilot, and I kind of enjoyed it in a way that I didn't really expect to when I first heard of the show and started watching it.
Yeah. Now, you weren't on the Pilot Roundtable yet. You weren't the co-host when we did this show. I don't think you did the Pilot Roundtable, so I'm interested on your thoughts on the pilot. Before, I assume you watched the pilot before this episode. Did you enjoy the pilot? Did you enjoy this episode more than the pilot? What's your progression?
I think that now that we're on episode 8, I think it was, of the show, I kind of am more in tune to what the tone of the show is and who the characters are and exactly what they're trying to go for with the plot. So I definitely enjoyed this most recent episode. With the pilot, I think I was kind of weary because normally I'm not a huge fan of the women can have everything movement. Mm-hmm. I think it's kind of a pun intended. It's kind of a cop-out.
Ooh, good work.
And you know me, and I love my police procedurals, and to have one catered towards women is sort of a new, interesting idea, but they always have to kind of sprinkle in the single mom aspect to have women get kind of hooked onto it outside of just it being a police procedural. So now that the show is sort of 8 episodes in and we're kind of seeing it establish its tone, I definitely enjoyed it more than I did initially with just the pilot.
Yeah, my history with this show is a weird one, especially because I shouldn't care about the show at all, because like you noted, this is a show for women, and it has succeeded in that. Its ratings are okay, which for NBC is a smashing success.
Yes.
So, I mean, going in, I am always a sucker for the idea of a procedural, a police procedural, but that's light, like a sort of comedy procedural. Not really a dramedy, because that's kind of a different genre of shows entirely, but really a procedural comedy almost. And the show kind of promised that, starring Deborah Messing from Will and Grace, of course, and the tone is noticeably lighter than from CSI or Chicago Fire or whatever other procedural you want to throw in there. So I was intrigued at the start, and then I watched the pilot, and I hated it so much. I just hated this. I thought, why am I watching these awful people solve crimes. Like every single person on screen in the pilot I thought was a horrible, loathsome human being. And especially her two children,
Oh, I
whom
hated them. Yeah.
who in the pilot she poisons. She gives her children, she gets her children sick, to the point of vomiting, so that they will hopefully be more toned down during a meeting with a kindergarten or preschool who they are way too rambunctious to get into, but she's trying to trick the administrator. And I'm like, this is the behavior of a psychopath.
Yeah.
This is like, she should be in jail. Like, why am I rooting for her to solve crimes? She should be in jail. And so I haven't watched a single second of it, needless to say, since then, and up until episode 8, so it's had a little bit of time. And I'm not going to say I enjoyed this episode, that's a little strong, but I didn't loathe this episode. I thought that this was actually a very functional hour of procedural television. I think the tone really helps. You know, you're not dealing with corpses and CSI and autopsies and all that. You're kind of moving along, and I followed the case fine, and I thought I sort of chuckled at some of the dialogue, and I wouldn't say it's a good show, but I would say it's a functional show at this point, which is way more than I expected.
With the other reviews we've been doing, or the other pilots we've been watching, yeah, I think that kind of tops our list.
Well, and this is a good example of why we're doing the check-ins, because Blair was on the original pilot roundtable for this, and we eviscerated this show and said, like, it should be canceled. And now I kind of get it. Like, I get what it's going for. Again, I don't think it's good necessarily, but I at least understand, like, what it's going for. And I think what really helped here is the kids were in this episode for about 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And their presence, I think, brings out the worst in every character. And so shipping them off and sending her to what I guess was a male strip club seemed to lighten everything up a bit. Like, she had some good banter with the strippers. So we mentioned this is a show for women, right?
No, I was gonna say, actually, I read it. I think it was like a Huffington Post review, and the reviewer had basically said something along the same lines, where he's like, "Yeah, the characters are definitely solid, but like from like the pilot initially, him watching it, he was just like, they kind of made it a point to make sure that you knew that her children were like just monsters."
Yeah.
So that was my one thing, was I was like, they probably could have toned that down. Like, maybe they didn't need to be like so over the top. Like, I get, like, she's a single mom, so she's going to be like a little bit more like frantic and a little bit like trying to just kind of make ends meet and trying to kind of run around and manage these two. Because I mean, kids have a lot of energy as is, but like, these kids are different.
Yes.
These kids are like a little bit more.
No, these kids are monster children. They're devil children. So yeah, but I think to the show's credit, it's done that, right? Based on this episode, this episode wasn't about the kids the way the pilot was, and I think that was a big thing, that this episode was really about the case, and the case was just fine. It was just fine, and it got through it okay. I'm still not sure that the show has a fundamental grasp on comedy. I feel like some of the jokes fall flat. I think the show fundamentally mistakes, like, terrible behavior for comedy. But it was minimized in a way that it wasn't in the pilot here. And so I think it still has some bad instincts, and it still hasn't quite figured out how to make jokes work, but it does seem to be on its way. And if the ratings hold, then maybe by the end of the season, this show will actually be like somewhere between okay and good, which is a million times more optimistic than I ever thought I'd be after sitting through the pilot.
No, absolutely. And I think the casting of Deborah Messing was just a really big asset on their side, because with the demographic that they're catering to. I mean, like, we kind of grew up watching like Will and Grace and kind of seeing her with like Smash and things like that. And, you really know that she can hold and carry a TV show, and to have her playing kind of the dual role of being nurturing and being in like a completely male dominated field, I think she pulls it off very well.
Yeah, I should admit, like, in the pilot, Blair and I eviscerated her. We thought she was terrible. But in this episode, I will say she settled in. She settled in nicely, and I think she was very good in this episode. And has learned how to work with the material she was being given, because she wasn't helped by the material of the pilot.
No.
Okay, so Olivia, thumbs up or thumbs down on Mysteries of Laura?
I was gonna say, like you said before, now that the show's actually settled and is kind of finding its place, I'm gonna give it a thumbs up because I want to see where it goes.
Yeah, this is still hard for me. I'm going to cop out, no pun intended, and and give this a thumb sideways. I don't want to give it a straight thumbs down because I am a little bit interested in what it's going to turn into. I'll probably check in again around like episode 15 or something. See, every 8 or so episodes feels about right for me with this show. Just to see if it's sort of got it down, because again, I'm really, really interested in the idea of a funny cop procedural. Not like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a show that I like, but that is a comedy, but a procedural that also has a funny tone. And so I think that we're a lot closer than we were in the pilot. So I'm going thumb sideways. I'm going to monitor it. All right, so our second show today is Fox's Red Band Society, of which we watched episode 6 called Ergo Ego.
Yes.
Olivia, you weren't on the roundtable for this one either.
No.
What did you think?
I honestly, just because with the topic that the show is covering, I think it kind of accomplishes that heartwarming aspect in a way that's it's not too much, because I mean, like, you're dealing with children with cancer, like that can get extremely heavy, but I think that the show covers it in a way that they touch on the heaviness and they're able to make that impact without being too much. So they also have like comedic aspects in it. Yeah, I definitely do like the show, and every review that I read of it, it kind of said the same thing, where it's just like it is a very heartwarming show at the end of it. Like you can, kind of critique it, but at the end of the day, it is like it has that kind of resonance that kind of stays with you.
I hate this show.
Oh, no.
I full disclosure did not make it through this episode. I just there's something that feels to me like it's very manipulative about this show, and I don't buy it. I don't buy that it's heartwarming. Like I know that it's attempting to be heartwarming, and that it has swelling music and children in various stages of unhealth in a hospital that functions more like some kind of boarding school than a hospital, but I'm not on board for it, and I'm definitely not in the demo, and I know that some people are on board, but I'm just not. I feel like all the emotional beats, or most of the emotional beats, ring so hollow to me and so manufactured, and the idea that every episode ends in like a powwow sing-along cry fest is so patronizing to me. Like I feel like this is a show designed. It's sort of like a I'm gonna mention a good show, but it's like Parenthood in that it's a show designed to make you feel things explicitly. Like that is the show is there to make you feel something, not to tell a story. The difference with Parenthood, I think, is that it does tell a story and does it well. And I think Red Band Society is just like a feelings manufacturing plant, and it that exists solely so that young people can watch it and root for relationships between sick children, and it just I hate it. I hate it so much.
That is the one aspect, because you kind of see what's her name, Emma, kind of jumping around between choosing the two guys, and then they have the comatose kid giving the voiceover, and like, yeah, that aspect I definitely see where you're coming from, where it just gets a little bit much. To kind of say the least. And I know, like, I think we all have experienced cancer firsthand, and we've all, like, had run-ins with it and been touched by it in different aspects. So I think the show kind of plays on that. And of course, you're talking about cancer for young children, because I think that sometimes we think that diseases are reserved for older people. Like we think about like middle-aged people having cancer, or like, our grandparents having cancer. To put it in the scope of it being like very like young teenagers, it's sort of different. But yeah, no, I definitely can see where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, but I see where you're coming from too, because if you buy it, if you get past that and sort of buy in to this being an actual world and get invested in the characters and sort of push out whatever concerns there are about the show's intentions and what the show actually wants to do and what points it actually wants to make, there's a lot here to latch on to. I mean, that's sort of the purpose of the show, is that you've got relationships, you've got coma kids, you've got, the girl who's the cheerleader who's kind of a monster but secretly is very sensitive and very wanting to be liked, but she can never admit it. Like, there's a lot to go off of and a lot for people to get invested in, but there's this initial gate for me that I'm just not getting past, which is I just feel like the show it's too thinly veiled for me. Like, that the show is just it just makes me mad to watch it. Like, it just I feel I don't think the show has anything to say. Like, that's my, like, I think this show exists because a focus group of people said that we want to see kids in a hospital. We want to see Glee if all the kids were sick and it was set in a hospital.
That's
like,
actually a really good comparison, because I kind of started to get that vibe after a while. Like, all of a sudden they would just start breaking out into numbers.
oh, you better believe there's going to be a musical number before this season ends.
Oh, dear
if
God.
there hasn't been already. But no, it's just I don't. Maybe if I was 10 years younger, I would buy in, but I feel like I'm old and jaded now, and I'm just not. I'm unmoved by stuff that I feel like is directly intended to be moving. Like, it's just too much for me, and I'm just out. I'm out on the show.
No, exactly. Honestly, I think the saving grace for me in the show is that if it did not have Octavia Spencer in it, I probably would not be as sold. There's something about her character and just her on the show that just lends itself to kind of driving the episodes. But if her presence was lacking on the show, it would be Glee in a hospital, unfortunately.
Yes, and I wish the premise of this show was a nurse in a children's ward has to deal with her day-to-day life. To me, that's a story. 6 kids in a hospital that functions like a camp isn't a story. That's a feelings factory. The nurse in the hospital, played by the unimpeachable Octavia Spencer, that's a story. And that I feel like is we missed it. Because I would be very open to this show if it was about the nurse and if all the kids still existed but they were in the back. But it's about the kids. And that's problematic on so many levels to me. Not the least of which is the fact that I'm generously going to say that half of them can actually act, and that none of the characters are anything more than, like, just again, feelings factories. Like, they were all carefully crafted to make us feel certain things. And I just wish Octavia Spencer was on the show 1,000% more than she is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so Olivia, thumbs up or thumbs down on Red Band?
I'm going to take your tone from the last thing that we just did and probably give it a thumb sideways. Like, I wouldn't be completely devastated if it got canceled, but I don't necessarily want to see it fail.
Okay, well, I'm giving it a straight up thumbs down. I don't like the show. I'm against this show. I'm against you, Red Band Society. All right, our final pilot check-in, and our first pilot wake, our pilot funeral, canceled this morning. ABC's Selfie. We watched both episodes that aired this week, which turned out to be the series' last. Episode 5, Even Hell Has Two Bars, and episode 6, Never Block Cookies. Olivia, thoughts on Selfie's departure?
I'm so torn. I'm so torn. Oh my God. That's the thing. It's just, I wish, all right, I think what the show did really, really well is that it had the talent. Like, I think that Karen Gillian and John Cho had this incredible chemistry, but it did not have the content to back up the 2 stars of this show. Like, if the content of the show and it had like a really good, like, solid base, it could have been really, really good, but they just copped out so hard with everything, and I'm very disappointed because I really would have liked to see the show go far, but I can't say that I'm, like, really, really sad to see it go.
Now, how would you say it copped out? Because you were on the pilot roundtable for Selfie, and your great and undying love of My Fair Lady sort of carried you to enjoying the pilot. Did you think that these episodes were worse than the pilot? Better? Like, was there any change in your opinion on the show?
I think they were trying, but that's the thing is you had brought up in the pilot that like it's sort of a show that was trying to be hip, but they didn't quite know how to do so. And it was a
Yeah.
show centering around technology as if it was written by someone who didn't know technology. Like they have
Yes.
an episode where Henry is trying to figure out Facebook. And I'm like, I'm sitting here like looking at it. I'm like, my grandmother has Facebook and she's
Right.
very, very good at it. The fact that
Yes.
Henry's sitting there and he like literally has no idea what he's doing. He works as an ad executive in a hip ad agency and he needs to be kind of like on top of these kinds of things. It kind of didn't make sense.
Yes.
And I think characters were just kind of hit and miss. Like when they had chemistry, like it was like a 10. Like they did a great job, like when they were like on top of it. But then it sort of went back and forth episode to episode. So like I feel like an episode would end really, really strong and they had this really good connection. And then the next episode would start and it was like as if nothing had happened.
Yeah, and my two biggest complaints about the pilot, and the reason that I give the pilot a thumbs down, were that the show, as you just mentioned, the show is about technology. It has no grasp of technology, and that the central dynamic needed to be more even. I had a lot of issues with the way that the Karen Gillan character was portrayed in the pilot, and I think that for the show to work, they had to be even with the Jean Cho character. Like they both had to be equally flawed, and they both had to be equally helping each other. Because otherwise, you end up rooting for one over the other, and I think that defeats the purpose of the show, where you're rooting for them both. And it has definitely not solved its lack of understanding of technology, as you
Nope.
just said. I do think these two episodes solved the other issue. I think that I liked Karen Gillan a lot more in these two episodes than I did in the pilot. Like 100% more. Like
Yeah.
I thought that character was charming, and sure she's still got issues, but she also wasn't ruining weddings the way she was in the pilot. Like they toned down the character just a little bit and like how bad she is, and they also made the Jean Cho character worse. That he's now really screwing up because of his sort of social phobia, and that they sort of met in the middle. I felt like, and I found these episodes charming and maybe not like hilariously funny, but also funny enough. I really enjoyed David Harewood, the boss
Yes.
who has just taken it upon himself to basically become Burt Cooper and Mad Men and just sort of wander around saying insane non sequiturs and just kind of like bring a sort of demented energy to the proceedings. And I really enjoyed his presence in both episodes. Like in one of them, Karen Gillan is trying, along with the receptionist, is trying to hook Jean Cho up with the chick at the coffee hut, and the boss, David Harewood, walks into the office and then immediately joins in their plan. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's good.
Like he's like really concerned at first that they were hacking into Henry's personal information,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden he's like, "Oh wait, no, we're helping him find love." Like this is awesome because he's been like trying to kind of like flirt with all the other female employees in like a very like platonic kind of
Yeah.
fun, energetic way.
Yeah, he's just doing silly things, and I really enjoyed that. And it's a way to sort like to have a side character like that who's not a chubby bearded friend.
God, thank you.
Was
Yes.
awesome. I'm so glad that the show doesn't have a chubby bearded friend. It's the only comedy this season that doesn't. And I enjoyed these two episodes, and I'm very sad it's canceled because the stars of this show are great, and they definitely hadn't figured it out. Like it's still not there comedically. I think it's there tonally, which it wasn't in the pilot. It's still not as funny as it needs to be a comedy, but I'm sad that it won't get there because I feel like it would have gotten there
Yeah.
based on the progression from the pilot to this episode. And so I'm genuinely bummed that ABC, a network known for putting horrible comedies on the air, pulled the plug so quickly on this one.
I know, and they just started doing homages to My Fair Lady. Like, I know you're not a fan of it, but yeah, when Henry comes in and he does the "I'm accustomed to your face" line, I just like lost everything. Like, and then I found out it was canceled. I was like, no,
Oh.
no, why does this have to happen? They were doing like getting there, like you said, like they were like verging on something, but we're not gonna find out what that something is.
No, yeah, the show was on its way. The way, and all comedies are like this. I mean, with comedies, the first couple episodes are always going to be disaster, and you just are sort of looking for pieces, and by episode 6, they had kind of put the pieces towards a puzzle. Like they weren't in the right place, but they were sort of on the board. And you could see them sort of fitting them in slowly one by one. And it's a real bummer that ABC gave up on this one so quickly. And I think it's largely because they called it Selfie, which is such a stupid name, and
Yeah.
it just makes it so that people don't want to watch. And that's really unfortunate because this was going somewhere.
Yeah.
So Olivia, final thumbs up or thumbs down? Should people watch the 5 episodes of Selfie? Yes or no?
Honestly, yeah, I think it really is worth the time. Like, unfortunately, we're not going to see where the rest of the story goes, but there's just like a charm there that you can't argue with if you actually watch the show.
Yeah, I will give it a post-mortem thumbs up. It doesn't mean anything at this point, but we'll pour one out for Selfie, a departed show, joining the much less mourned Manhattan Love Story as its nightly partner on ABC in cancellation. All right, well, that wraps up this episode of the Pilot Roundtable. You can read both Olivia and I on showrunnings.tv and listen to all of our podcasts at southgatemediagroup.com. Thanks for listening.